Merry Christmas. It's not over, this birthing. There are always newer skies into which God can throw stars. When we begin to think that we can predict the advent of God, that we can box the Christ in a stable in Bethlehem, that's just the time that God will be born in a place we cannot imagine and we will not believe. Those who wait for God watch with their hearts and not their eyes, listening, always listening for angel words. This poem is from the book Kneeling in Bethlehem by Anne Weems. And through a collection of poetry, Weems takes us through the season of Advent in all of the ordinary places. When I came across this poem, I felt like this was a gentle nudge from God to guide us on this Christmas Eve. There are few stories that are more known, better known than the Christmas story. From movies to songs, books, and paintings, even if you do not consider yourself a person of faith, you can probably recite most of the story. A young couple needs a place to stay before she has a baby. An innkeeper opens his barn for this baby to enter the world. Angels and shepherds, wise men and soldiers. When you combine all the pieces from the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, you have a really good adventure story. There is something in it for everyone. And what else can be said about the story? How can we learn or discover or even notice anything new after hearing it over and over? Gotta tell you, I'm not sure. And yet, here we are. It's Christmas Eve, so we might as well meet God where we are and see what new gift can be given to us. After all, in the words of Weems, it's not over. It's been a really hard year. We have seen more violence both in schools and around the nation. Inflation has wreaked havoc on our daily lives. Global conflicts are on the rise. We had a presidential election that has women, LGBTQIA+ folks, immigrants and refugees, and anyone who cares about the climate or education or basic freedoms. We're all on edge. Corporations and their employees are in dispute. The housing crisis seems to never end. And every day we wait to see which international government will be the next to collapse. Many of us in this room and friends and loved ones that we know have experienced deep, life-changing loss. We have faced and are facing medical diagnoses and treatments. We have worried and fretted over our families. We have walked hard days with our friends, and we have wondered when the next shoe is going to drop. And we have experienced tension and division and disruption in this place, in our church, our community. We're weary, we're tired, and we're all holding out hope for something better, needing something or someone to alleviate the angst. We are all reaching for a lifeline that will pull us out of the muck and into a rejuvenating essence. And so we turn to the familiar, to the comfortable. We turn to the Christmas story. After all, when life is chaotic, when uncertainty abounds, and when we cannot calm ourselves, it is the familiar that can bring us peace. In fact, researchers at the University of Buffalo have discovered that rewatching the TV shows we know by heart gives us a level of belonging and comfort, and it lowers our stress levels. It's what we need in a world that can be unpredictable and lonely. So before we move on, I need to address a word that I just used, and that word is the word comfort or comfortable. Over the last several weeks, this word has been used in a derogatory way amongst our community, about our community, by those who may not even know our community. It has been suggested that we are more interested in being comfortable than courageous. And it seems to me, when I've done a lot of reflecting on this, that you can be both. And it seems to me, when I reflect on this, that you and me and we need to be both. And while there is a challenge in being both at the same time, I believe it's doable. And I think we see it in the story of the shepherds. In the familiarity of this Christmas story, we find ourselves being comforted and courageous at the same time. So let's get into the story. The shepherds were tending and caring to their flock. It sounds so serene, so relaxing. Should we transport ourselves there? And yet, we know it was not. This was a job that was not only physically demanding, but it was mentally and emotionally demanding as well. According to Josephus, the Jewish historian, up to 265,000 lambs would have been sacrificed in the temple on Passover. And the Passover lamb was called the Lamb of God. So these lambs had to meet the strictest legal religious regulations of the Jewish faith. They had to be no more than 1 year old. They had to be male, and they had to be without spot or blemish. Therefore, they had to be born in controlled conditions, inspected for birth defects, before being raised in protected conditions. Where did they get that many lambs? The law also said that the animals that were to be sacrificed had to be born within 5 miles of Jerusalem. Bethlehem is 5 miles from Jerusalem. The hillsides around Bethlehem, therefore, were basically a first-century lamb factory farm. Parents, I apologize that you will have to talk to your children about that later. When the lambs were born, they were wrapped in strips of cloth to protect them and placed in a stone feeding trough in the birthing barn until the priests could come by and inspect them. This was a stressful job. The role of the shepherd carried with it so much significance, so much weightiness. There was competition among these men and women. And likely there was a sense of how you did in season 1 would impact how you did in season 2 and season 3 and on and on. And then in addition to the toil of the work, there was the reality that as a shepherd, you were more focused on your sheep than you were on yourself. And so therefore, hygiene and purity rituals were not at the top of your priority list. So not only are you not a part of the elite or even the average, you are a marginalized group of people and you were ignored. So when the skies are full of heavenly hosts telling these men and women to leave their work, to abandon their literal livelihood, they were walking away from what they knew. It was hard, but it was comfortable, into what they did not know. Leaving was risky. No matter what the stories of no matter if you are in the presence of beings that are a part of your religious heritage, and you know well the stories of what has happened when these beings appear, these shepherds had to have a level of fear and worry, and yet they went. So think about this. This role of a shepherd is one that demands an almost perfectionistic outcome, a product that is necessary for attaining God's favor, and yet by the culture that you're in, you are a nobody. So now you're being told to go see a newborn because some beings in the sky told you to. It's risky. It's courageous. And it seems, at least from the way the story's been passed down through time, that they did this with little to no regard of how they would be viewed, of how they would be treated, and what the consequences of their actions would be. And we know the rest of the story. The shepherds arrive at the stables, they see the baby and his parents, they told them about the fields and the angels, And then they go back to the fields and they share the story over and over and over again. So what's the message that we in 2024 are hearing? What is the wisdom that we are receiving? The narrative of the shepherds has a lot to teach us. We only hear of them in Luke's gospel and only in these few verses in chapter 2. They come into the narrative and then they're never heard from again, except for every year on Christmas Eve. The shepherds are the first people to hear the good news. They are not just a part of the Christmas story. They are vital to the Christmas story. They are reminders that it is often the marginalized and the overlooked who God seeks out. And while we all nod our heads and say, yes, yes, that's how it should be, what are we doing in reality? Are we ready to listen to the voices of the ones who others ignore? Are we willing to stop where we are and push aside our comforts and be courageous and hear what they are saying? Are we able to let them guide us the way that the shepherds allowed the angels to guide them? Are we able to see the wisdom that they possessed, the wisdom to abandon what they knew and go to the unknown, to greet a baby, and to face the consequences of leaving their flock? That's courage. That's wisdom. The shepherds were given a very clear path to the stable. They knew where they were going, but they had to use their wisdom, the wisdom that came from God, to actually go. They had the angels telling them where to go, but they still had to choose to go there. They had to say to themselves, staying put will not show us anything new. And going somewhere else, not where the angels are telling us to go, will not let us see what God has for us. And so they followed. They went. They took the risk to see what was waiting for them. Now, unless it's coming in the form of all these drones that have been sighted around the country in the last several weeks, I don't know about anything filling our skies telling us exactly where we should go and what we will find when we get there, and then what happens after that. Rather, we must also rely on the wisdom that God has given each of us. And we must rely on the relationships that we have with each other. These relationships will be vital as we answer the question, are we going the direction that God is leading us? Or are we staying where we are and not engaging with God? The path for many of us this Advent has been rough. We've had to dig really deep to find hope and peace and joy and love. We've had to look a little bit harder for the magic and the magnificence of the season. And perhaps we've had to lean on the words of Frederick Buechner that the worst things are not the last things. And if we are honest in that digging deep, we have discovered the gifts that Advent brings. After all, we have found our way to this space, in this moment, at this time. We're bringing what we have. So how do we use the wisdom of the shepherds to leave the fields and then leave the manger and then tell the story? It starts with each of us individually. We have to check in with ourselves. We have to be sure that we're not living in an echo chamber, surrounding ourselves with others who just want the exact same things that we do. Like the shepherds, we must be in collaboration with one another, paying attention to who is around and who is not. We must put ourselves in the field, assessing that everyone, shepherd and sheep, is accounted for. After all, how will the glory of God be told if someone is missing? How will the glory of God be experienced if someone is left out? How will the glory of God be lived if we are not finding ways to live into it as a community? We must hold tight to peace and love and joy And maybe this year we cling a little longer with a little more vigor to hope. These are the ways that we will experience the good news. These are the gifts that will allow us to go back to the field and get dirty and smelly and face criticism in a world that demands a lot from us. Like the shepherds, God has given us wisdom. God has revealed God's self to us. Maybe angels aren't literally filling the skies for us, but they're around us. They're telling us to keep moving, keep pressing, don't stop, don't give up. If we're being honest and humble, we're really not always sure where we're going. And the road is probably going to get bumpy and windy. There's going to be traffic. There's definitely going to be construction zones. But if we are aiming for the same direction, headed towards the same place, the same goal, the same dream, then we can trust that just like the shepherds made their way to the stable, we will make our way there too. Amen.